So there are 27,000 wild Asian elephants in India in designated elephant reserves. But when we look at the composition of the elephant reserve, only 1/4 of elephant reserve falls in either a national park or a sanctuary, which means it's a protected area. An overwhelmingly large proportion of elephant reserves falls in multiple use areas, which means areas where elephants have to live alongside human beings. So the threat to elephants largely comes from us human beings, either because of fragmentation or forest degradation. Let's talk about the degradation first. Degradation happens when people, largely forest communities or people who live along the fringe of the forest and who are dependent on the forest, keep extracting fuel wood from it or light fires. All forest fires in peninsular India are man-made. They are done so that the livestock gets some fodder during the drier months. As a result, the quality of habitat, elephant habitat, constantly becomes worse than it was in the past. And therefore, the herd, to meet its energy requirements, will have to move. As a result, herds are forced to move in areas which are not actually traditionally a good elephant habitat. They are forced there. And what are those areas? Those are the second best option that elephants have in terms of fodder is crop fields. And so when forests get degraded, elephants are forced to go and raid either an orchard, a banana plantation, could be sugarcane, could be any other crop like rice, wheat, bajra, whatever is palatable. So forest degradation is the main reason why elephants have started interacting with human beings at a high level. The fragmentation, on the other hand, is caused when human beings cut the corridor of elephants. How does it happen? Simply because of developmental projects. What are those projects? One is the linear infrastructure projects, which means roads. Roads are either new roads are built or old roads are widened into 4 lane, 6 lane. Obviously, the speed of vehicles go up. And that road that cuts through a corridor can actually snap the tie between two populations. Railway tracks also, although the frequency of railways, of trains is not as much as vehicles on the road, but the speeds are high. And a lot of elephants die because of railway lines. There are some areas where elephants have stopped moving across railway lines because of heavy traffic. Canal systems, some of these big canals on the irrigation projects, big dams are so wide and the banks are so steep and covered in cement that it's too slippery for elephants to, once if they fall in that water, they can never walk up. So they become a big barrier for movement. And finally, you have power lines. Power lines have a role to play because they too clear forests. And because power is now reaching, electricity is reaching in the hinterlands of India, power lines are tapped by people to electrocute their farms so that they are not raided by wild animals. And as a result, a lot of elephants die there. And so between degradation and fragmentation, this 27,000 elephants of India are under tremendous stress, and that stress is only going up with time. So they are doing reasonably well inside protected areas. But as I told you, most of their lives are spent outside, and that's where the problems are. So if we have to stabilize elephant populations, we have to make sure that the corridors are strengthened, which means the linear infrastructures are not allowed to snap or to cut these corridors, either by moving them away from the corridors or where it's not possible, providing mitigation structures, which is an underpass where the road goes above and the elephants have free passage from below. That should be done on all new roads or railways that cut through elephant corridors. But there should be retrofitting done on existing highways and railways because a lot of corridors have already got snapped. Canals in some states, at least in Maharashtra, because in wildlife habitats, they are taking water lines underground, and there is enough money to make sure that in those extremely critical elephant corridors and habitats, canal systems can also, for a few kilometers, go underground. So technology should be used to re-establish corridors, because if corridors are good and if there is drought in one forest, that elephant population will walk through the forest to another forest where there is water availability, and elephants can walk great distances. And if that happens, then they will not deviate from their course and therefore they will not raid crops. So we have to find solutions for fragmentation. Degradation, of course, happens because people are very poor, they are dependent on the forest, or sometimes unknowingly, they grow crops which are magnets for elephants. So sugarcane in areas where there were no sugarcane in the past, obviously is going to attract elephants because there is huge amount of carbohydrate in it. So while planning crops, so if we have an integrated approach, you have a development plan for a large landscape, you should take into consideration the requirements of elephants as well when you actually put a plan in place. You should ensure that the crops that are taken in that area, especially those areas that fall right in the middle of the corridor, should not be those which would attract elephants. It could be herbs, it could be tree species which are not palatable when it comes to elephants, because that also in the dry season, when because of the irrigation system, the crop fields are green, forests are dry. Obviously, a herbivore that needs to eat more than 100 kgs of fodder every day will get attracted to these crops. So if you have to consolidate elephant corridors, one will also have to look at the way agriculture is being done. Putting electric fences around crops which attract elephants is not a solution. So you are actually baiting the elephant by growing sugarcane and then encircling the sugarcane field with electricity. Obviously, elephants are going to come, and as I said, they are very intelligent animals and they will find a way around it, and there will be losses on both sides. So at that level of the agriculture department also, some study needs to be done to see how livelihoods of people can be supported through agriculture, but not through crops that are palatable for elephants. Agroforestry is a great solution because as it is, these farmers are marginalized. They are hardly able to make their ends meet. If they can move from traditional farming to agroforestry, then it could be a win-win, because you will be able to build a habitat and also reduce the depredation of elephants on those crops. And if you do that, obviously, we will be able to reduce the stress on elephants. I'm not saying that the stress on the elephants can be removed completely, because there are just too many people in our country and the habitat has shrunk greatly over the last 100 years. We should also try and rebuild some of these natural forests through assisted natural regeneration, because some of these degraded forests, around 22-23% of India comes under forest cover. That's on paper, but in reality, a lot of it, nearly, I would say 70% of it, is in some stage of degradation. Now, those forests need to be reinstilled. Now, that cannot happen through plantation. It should happen through natural regeneration, which means the existing stresses on that forest, anthropogenic pressure, should be reduced, which means people who live around these forests should be given better livelihood opportunities so that their dependence for daily subsistence on those forests will go down, which means creating businesses which can be run locally and the cash flow can remain within the community. So empowering local communities and somehow mitigating or shifting linear infrastructure are two big ways of safeguarding the population. Obviously, there is also a threat from poaching, but India has a very good track record. Africa, nearly about 2 years ago, lost 30,000 wild elephants through poaching. During the same period in India, not even 20 elephants were poached. And so while the African population is much larger than that of India, however, proportionately, because elephants are found in nearly 23 states, poaching incidences have been there, but they are low. While I say this, obviously protection needs to be strengthened, because poachers are always waiting to partake with animal body parts. So the protection mechanism should be strengthened wherever possible, not only in the protected areas, but also across the corridor. So to summarize, we have to find solutions for fragmentation, extremely important that is, empowering communities so that their dependence on the forest goes down and the forest regenerates back to its original state. And third, improving the protection mechanism. If we can do all these three, we will be able to protect these magnificent animals. One more step that we must take as Indian government is to keep putting pressure on CITES, which is all the consortium that has been formed across the world to protect endangered species, to make sure that the ban on trade of ivory should not be lifted, because a lot of African elephant populations have been ravaged because of the illegal trade in ivory. Somehow, India has been a huge voice to stop or to ban trade of ivory, that is free trade of ivory. And that ban should continue, and India must keep playing a role to ensure that the illegal trade of ivory, largely out of China and Vietnam, should be controlled. So the control on illegal trade of wildlife will also reduce the pressure of poaching, not only in India, but also in Africa. And so it's a Herculean task, but the Indian government has shown that it is possible to save this animal. Going forward, they will have to do that much more, but not only them, NGOs like Wildlife Conservation Trusts, local communities who have tolerated and revered animals, elephants especially, and the corporates, because through CSR, the corporates can also support. There are several organizations who work on wild elephants outside of government. Corporates should come forward and support those organizations so that they can help the government safeguard the future of these magnificent mammals.